Hi, my name is Jim Strutz, and I teach Bible. And I want to read some scripture from the book of Exodus. It's about the Exodus, actually. It's about Israel coming out of the land of Egypt, and the things that lead up to it, the things that carry on as they're moving out, and how that applies to today. Because I do believe we are in a transition just like the Egyptians, or like the Israelites were in a period of transition. And their transition speaks a little bit about some of the things that we're actually experiencing. So, in the book of Exodus, it talks about this Moses coming back to rescue his people, and there's plague after plague that comes by the hand of Moses, by the hand of God, actually. And the Israelites are expecting, hoping that this might lead to some kind of relief or some kind of deliverance from the land of Egypt. And they're not sure what to expect there, and they're not sure how this is going to happen, but they are expecting and they're hoping. And so plague after plague happens. They get their hopes up, and then nothing happens. And another plague, and maybe this time, and no, it doesn't happen. So finally, on the 10th plague, the last plague, they butcher a lamb. They take the blood, sprinkle it on the doorpost, and they have the Passover commemoration, or actually it's they're looking forward. It's the first Passover anyway, and they're not really sure what to expect, but they're hoping they're going to be delivered, because they're told to dress like they're ready to travel, the shoes on, their coats on, get ready to go. This is the time to get ready and plan and prepare for this. Well, all right, so with that, here's what happens. In chapter 12, verse 33, it says, the Egyptians were suddenly urgent with the people to send them out of the land in haste. See, what had happened was a bunch of people had died, a bunch of cattle had died, and now all of a sudden the Egyptians are like, before they were saying, no, ain't going to happen. And now they're saying, yes, in fact, get out now. He said this, we shall all be dead. If you don't leave now, we're all going to be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened. The Israelites took their dough before it was leavened. Remember, they had an unleavened bread dinner the night before, and they ate their dinner in haste. And so the people took their dough before it was leavened, and their kneading bowls being bound up in their cloaks on their shoulders. In other words, they're packing their dough in their kneading bowls, and they're heading out of town before they can even let the dough rise. Verse 39 says, they baked unleavened cakes of dough that they had brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not wait. Nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. So suddenly, unexpectedly to them, they have to go right now. No one was ready. That was the interesting thing. Nobody was ready. They were told to get ready, but they ate their meal and it was dark out, and so nothing happened, and so they went to bed. What else are you going to do? But when they woke up in the morning, life had changed suddenly, and now all of a sudden, they have to do something very, very different than they had ever done before. They have to pick all their stuff up and head out of town quick, because the Egyptians are like, now, go, now, just go. Eleanor Rule, a friend of mine, prophesied this last year. It says, even as the Lord changed Jacob into a sharp threshing instrument, and that's a reference to Isaiah chapter 41, says, get ready as he changes your identity, your occupation, your definition, and your destiny. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's what's going on here. God is changing our identity, our occupation, at least for some of us. For some of us, our definition and our destiny is being altered. And, what do you know? We weren't expecting this. We certainly weren't expecting the pandemic and all this lockdown, but we're discovering things about ourselves and about our culture and about our church even. So the story goes on, though, in Exodus 13, the next chapter, verse 21. The Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along on the way, and by night a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they might travel by day and by night. You think now they're in a hurry, they're in a hustle, traveling day and night. They can just go. Okay. But doesn't end up going very fast, actually, as it turns out. Exodus 15 says, verse 22, they set out from the Red Sea and they went 3 days into the wilderness of Shur. And then 15:27, and then they came by Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there by the water. Nice place to camp. But they didn't go very far. These weren't very big distances. But you know, when you got 1 million people you're dragging with you, life goes slow. I used to do a lot of river tripping, and I know with 1 or 2 people, you can move down a river pretty quick. You camp for, it just takes a few minutes to get your tent set up and go to sleep, cook a little bit of dinner, you go, and you get up in the morning, you make breakfast, load everything back in the raft, and you just head off. Well, when you get 10 people, it slows way, way down, because you can only go as fast as the slowest person. And when you have 1 million people, you're not going very fast. And that's what happens here. They're not going very fast. Okay, in chapter 16, verse 1, they set out from Elim, and they came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the 2nd month. 6 weeks. They've gone about halfway. This should have been a 1 week trip, and they've taken 6 weeks to do that. It's it's chapter 17. And they moved on from the wilderness of Sin by stages and camped at Rephidim. And then 19, verse 1, on the 3rd new moon after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, verse 2, they set out from Rephidim and came to the wilderness of Sinai. And there Israel camped before the mountain. It took them 3 months. This was 3 full moons after they had left. 3 months just to get this part. And they should have done this in 2-week traveling. And this is not a difficult hike. But when you got 1 million people, life goes a little slower. They didn't know where the journey was going. That was an interesting thing. They didn't know. They didn't know what the trip was going to be like. They didn't even know where they were going. They were going to the promised land, but what's a promised land? What does it look like? How far is it? Are we there yet? Yeah. It was their spirit-directed mystery adventure. And that's what we're on, a spirit-directed mystery adventure. So we are, again, tripping with the Spirit now, and life is changing. We don't know a whole lot about what's going to happen with the church, but we do know a few things. We know that God is transitioning His church. The cloud is moving, and we are transitioning. We are changing. But to what? We're not so sure about that. And how long is this trip going to take, and what is the result when we get done with this metaphorical trip? But we do know a couple of things. One is, pack light. This is, if you're going to change, if you're going to transition, if you're going to move someplace, pack light. Don't hold tightly to what you have. The cloud's moving, and God might require you leave it behind. So pack lightly. And don't hold tightly to the ideas that you think you know about how the church works. So, we all know how churches work. I mean, they all have an auditorium. They meet on Sundays usually, maybe Saturdays, maybe Fridays. But they all meet. They always have this auditorium. They have places for the kids to go, classes for the kids. They have a youth group. They got this thing going on, that a midweek service maybe, a prayer meeting. We have this. All these things that churches always do, or mostly do. And we think if a church is going to be successful, they have to do all these things. But I'm not so sure that's really true. And I'm not sure we're doing all the things we're supposed to, but I'm also very convinced we're doing a bunch of things that probably aren't required. I don't know. I'm just I'm just guessing here to some things, but my exhortation is, don't hold on to old ideas of the church that may not imply so directly in the church of the future, the near future, by the way. So don't build a foundation under what you have now. Your life is changing. Maybe you don't even know that yet, but your life is changing. The church is changing. Don't say, oh, this is so great. About halfway there. This is so great. This is so cool. Let's build 3 tabernacles right here. That was Peter's idea. Build 3 tabernacles. Yeah. Don't try to nail down your future from what you see right now. Don't bother, because it's changing. Things are changing. Another thing is to stay adjustable, stay flexible. Don't get caught off guard like the Israelites did. Otherwise, we'll all be packing our unleavened bread in our kneading bowls, wrapped up in our coats and packed on our shoulders, and we're heading out of the wherever we're from, and we don't know where we're going, and we're certainly not prepared. Don't try to nail down your future from what you see. Stay flexible. Don't settle down halfway there. Don't settle down halfway for the promise. The cloud keeps moving. Keep on camping. The Spirit is telling the church, this is a transition. We are being transformed. Yet few of us are actually prepared for the change because ready or not, God is changing His church. The church really is moving, whether we're ready for it or we're not ready for it. And like the Israelis, we have an unknown journey. We don't really know where we're going. What's the church becoming? We don't know. Don't even know. We don't know because we've never seen it before. But I urge you, don't quit halfway. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 1 says, "Therefore, while the promise of entering rest still stands, let us fear lest any of you should seem to have failed to reach it." Don't fail to reach it. It's not even about how well you have done before. It's about how you finish this journey. That's the important thing. There's no reward for going halfway. There isn't any. The reward is at the end of the journey. And the other thing we know is that if it wasn't for the miracles that Moses brought, by the hand of God brought by the hand of Moses, Israel would have been doomed. They wouldn't have made it. It's the same today, though. So don't worry about what it's going to cost you or what your provisions are going to be. He'll provide what you need when you need it. It's God's just-in-time supply. And He's pretty good at it, too. There will be a new way of doing kingdom life coming in the very near future. And part of this pandemic lockdown is probably God setting us up for changes that He's bringing to His church, bringing to His people. There's likely to be, we don't know what they are, but there's likely to be a couple of different things that we could take a look at. And one is an increased emphasis on discipleship and mentoring, even pastoral care, that the church hasn't really been very good at in the past. There's likely to be a whole lot of supernatural prophetic direction, timely messages, timely for the hour that we're living in, and apostolic leadership that directs the church away from the huddled mass of protection out into the world. Apostles needed to lead us into our community, into our culture, and to transform the culture. And we're going to see more and more of that as time goes on. The structure of churches are probably going to change. It'll be more organic and more functional. But it's probably going to be less and less of the typical thing we've seen in the past where a person or persons are in control. We're likely to see less control and more functional organization. We're likely to see more relationships that are built in small groups. And so if the church is large, if the church is small, fine, you got a small group. If the church is large, you need to get into small groups because that's where relationships are really developed. And that's where discipleship really happens. That's where maturity really develops. All right. So in closing, I'll just say on to Mount Sinai, wherever that is. This is our Spirit-directed mystery adventure. So enjoy the ride. Just enjoy the ride. Amen.